Brother kicked me out over sister-in-law's lies. Now they're homeless and want to move into my house. All right, I guess I need to get this off my chest. A few years ago, I was really struggling. I had just finished college, had a not-so-great job, and honestly, life wasn't looking too good for me. My older brother, Tom, who's 9 years older than me, offered me a place to stay with him and his wife, Karen. At the time, I was super grateful. I mean, who wouldn't be? Rent was ridiculously high, and I wasn't making enough to even consider living on my own. Tom had this nice house with a spare room, and he told me I could stay there as long as I needed until I got back on my feet. It felt like a lifeline. So I moved in with them. It wasn't a permanent solution, but I was trying to get myself together, you know? I didn't want to be a burden or anything, so I made sure I helped out around the house as much as possible. I did the cooking, cleaning, ran errands, all that stuff. I wasn't contributing much financially at first because I could barely afford my own groceries, but I pitched in whenever I could. Like if I had some extra cash, I'd buy groceries for the house or take care of the little things they needed. I thought it was going pretty well. At first, everything seemed fine. Karen was nice enough, and Tom and I have always been close, so it felt like I was in a safe place. Karen and I weren't best friends or anything, but I didn't think there was any problem between us. She never really said much, just kind of kept to herself, but I didn't take it personally. She was pregnant at the time, so I figured she just had her own stuff going on, but after about 6 months, things started getting weird. Like, subtle stuff at first. Karen would make these little comments like, "Oh, when the baby comes, we're going to need a lot more space." Or, "I wonder if we should start thinking about how to turn the guest room into a nursery." You know, hints like that. I kind of got the vibe that she wanted me gone, but Tom kept reassuring me, saying, "Don't worry about it. You can stay as long as you need." I believed him because, well, he's my brother. Why would I think otherwise, right? Then the comments got less subtle. Karen started complaining more openly, saying things like, "It's going to be really hard having a newborn and a third person in the house." I wasn't trying to overstay my welcome, but at the same time, I didn't have anywhere else to go just yet. I had finally gotten a decent job by this point, but it wasn't like I had enough saved up to just pack my bags and leave right away. One day things really started to shift. I remember it clear as day. Karen was sitting in the living room, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. Tom wasn't home yet, and Karen just starts talking to me out of nowhere. She tells me that she's uncomfortable with me living there, that it's affecting her peace of mind, and how she doesn't feel safe with some of the people I hang out with. I was like, "What people?" Because I barely went out, and when I did, it was usually with coworkers or old friends from college. Karen goes, "You know, I heard from Tom that some of your friends are involved in stuff like drugs, and I don't want that around my baby." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm not even close to anyone involved in that kind of crap, and I told her that. But she just shrugged like she knew something I didn't. I remember feeling like my stomach dropped because it was so out of left field, but I figured she was just stressed out with the pregnancy and all. I tried to brush it off, but things didn't stop there. After that conversation, Karen got colder. She'd give me these looks, like I was in her way, and barely spoke to me unless it was to drop more passive-aggressive hints about me leaving. I knew something was off, but I didn't want to believe that she'd straight up make things up about me. I mean, it's my brother's wife. What reason would she have to lie? Well, fast forward a couple of weeks, and Tom starts acting distant too. It's not like him, so I asked him one night if everything was okay, and he just said Karen's been really stressed lately. He didn't bring up anything specific, but the vibe was off. Like, it felt like he was hiding something, but I didn't push him on it. So when Karen started acting a bit more distant, I didn't think much of it. I figured she just needed space or was going through her own stuff. But then, she started making these comments. Little things that, in hindsight, were probably meant to push me out without actually saying it outright. Like, she'd mention how small the house felt all of a sudden, or how she needed more room for the baby's stuff. There was one time she even joked, "Maybe you'll be moving out before the baby comes, right?" And then laughed it off like it was no big deal. I remember laughing with her, but deep down I was like, wait, is she serious? It wasn't just the comments, though. She started avoiding me more. If I was in the living room, she'd go upstairs or into another room. I'd try to make conversation, ask her about the pregnancy, if she needed anything, and she'd just brush me off. I was starting to feel like a ghost in the house. The weird part was that Tom never seemed to notice. He was so wrapped up in the baby stuff, planning for the future, that he didn't see what was happening right in front of him. And then there was the day Karen dropped the bomb about me supposedly flirting with her. I still can't wrap my head around it. It was a regular Tuesday. Tom was at work and I had the day off, so I figured I'd do some cleaning around the house. You know, help out since I was staying there for free. Karen was sitting in the living room just scrolling through her phone, not really paying attention to anything. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters when she suddenly called out, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I walked over thinking she needed help with something, but the look on her face was just weird. She didn't seem upset, but there was something off about her expression, like she was about to drop some serious news on me. She started fiddling with her phone. I've noticed that I don't know how to say this, but you've been acting kinda flirty with me. I literally froze. I didn't even know what to say at first because it was so out of left field. Like what? Me? Flirting? With her? I laughed, thinking she was joking. Wait, what? Flirty? With you? That's crazy, Karen. But she wasn't laughing. She just stared at me, dead serious. No, I'm not kidding. Tom mentioned it to me too. He said he noticed it a while back. That's when the pit in my stomach dropped. Tom noticed it? What the hell was she even talking about? I had never, and I mean never, thought of Karen that way. She was my brother's wife, for crying out loud. The idea of flirting with her was insane. Karen, I don't know what you're talking about, I said, trying to stay calm. I wouldn't. That's not. But she cut me off. Look, I'm just telling you what I feel. And honestly, it's making me uncomfortable. I don't think it's a good idea for you to be here anymore, especially with the baby coming. I felt like the room was spinning. I didn't know how to respond. How do you defend yourself against something that never even happened? I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, completely blindsided. Tom said that? I finally managed to ask. She nodded, but something about the way she did it felt off. Like she wasn't telling the whole story, but I didn't know what part of it was missing. The rest of that conversation is kind of a blur. Karen kept talking about how it's not personal and it's just for the safety of the family, but all I heard was that she wanted me gone. The whole flirting thing was complete BS, but I didn't know how to prove it. And the fact that she claimed Tom noticed it too, that hurt the most. My own brother thought I was hitting on his wife. It didn't make any sense. After that day, things got real tense in the house. Karen stopped talking to me altogether, and Tom acted like everything was fine, but I knew he knew something was up. I tried to talk to him about it one night, but he just brushed me off, saying, "Karen's been really stressed with the pregnancy. Don't take it personally." Don't take it personally? How could I not take it personally when his wife was accusing me of something so ridiculous? It got worse when Karen started telling Tom that I was involved with bad people. She told him that some of my friends were into drugs, and that she didn't feel comfortable having me around the baby if I was bringing that kind of influence into their home. I barely even had friends over. I didn't have a social life because I was working and saving up to move out. But somehow, Karen had convinced Tom that I was hanging out with sketchy people. I don't know if Tom actually believed her, or if he just didn't want to deal with the drama, but he started acting weird around me too. He'd come home from work and barely say a word to me, like I wasn't even there. It was obvious Karen had gotten into his head, but every time I tried to bring it up, he'd shut me down. Just give Karen some space, he'd say. She's going through a lot right now. It didn't matter what I said. Karen had already made up her mind and she was doing everything she could to push me out. And the worst part? She was using my brother to do it. It was like watching someone build a case against you for something you didn't even do, and you're just standing there, powerless to stop it. By this point, I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I was already looking for apartments, but with the rent prices, it wasn't easy. I didn't have a lot of options, and the last thing I wanted was to end up on the streets. I was trying so hard to be patient, to not rock the boat, but deep down I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen made her final move. And when she did, I wasn't sure if Tom would have my back or if he'd side with her. So it finally happened. I knew it was coming, but when it did, it still hit me like a ton of bricks. Karen had been building up to this for weeks, and I guess I was just holding on to hope that Tom would step in and tell her to cut the crap. But, yeah, that didn't happen. I had just gotten home from work, another long day at my new job, and all I wanted to do was relax for a bit. I walked in the door and everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, actually. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something's off, but you can't put your finger on it right away. I headed towards my room, and that's when I saw it. All my stuff. My clothes, books, random belongings, packed up in boxes and bags, just sitting there in the hallway like trash waiting to be taken out. I stopped in my tracks. My heart started racing, and for a second I thought maybe there was some mistake. Maybe Karen was doing some weird cleaning thing, or I don't know. Maybe Tom was rearranging stuff. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This wasn't some misunderstanding. I walked into the living room, and there was Tom, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He didn't look at me at first, didn't say anything either, just sat there in this awkward silence. Karen was nowhere to be found, of course, leaving him to do the dirty work. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my anger bubbling up. Tom sighed, finally looking up at me with this guilty expression, like he was a little kid who got caught doing something wrong. "Karen, she thinks it's time for you to move out," he said. His voice was so quiet, like he was ashamed of even saying it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? You're kicking me out just like that? After everything?" He didn't even try to defend himself. He just nodded, looking at the floor. "It's not like that," he mumbled. "It's just, Karen's stressed with the pregnancy, and she feels uncomfortable with you being here. You know, with everything going on." Everything going on? What did that even mean? I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't caused any problems. All I did was live there, help out, and keep to myself as much as possible. And now I was being thrown out because Karen felt uncomfortable. It was such BS, and Tom knew it too, but he wasn't going to stand up to her. I could see that clearly now. "So that's it? You're just throwing me out on the street?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. "Over some lies Karen's been feeding you? I've done nothing but help around here, Tom. You know that." Tom stood up, running a hand through his hair, still avoiding eye contact. "I'm not throwing you on the street," he said. "I'll help you find a place. We can cover your security deposit, maybe even the first month's rent. It's not like we're abandoning you." Not abandoning me? It felt like the exact opposite. I wasn't asking for money. I was asking for some respect. For my own brother to have my back instead of just rolling over because his wife wanted me gone. "Karen said I was flirting with her, Tom. She said I was hanging out with bad people. You really believe that?" I asked, desperate for some kind of acknowledgement that he knew the truth. He didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. He either believed her, or he was too scared to disagree with her. Either way, I was screwed. "Look," he finally said, "Karen's been really stressed, and with the baby coming, we just need a little more peace in the house. You've been great, and I appreciate everything you've done, but this is what's best for everyone." What's best for everyone? What about what's best for me? I wanted to scream, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Karen had made up her mind, and Tom wasn't going to fight her on it. I was being pushed out, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I stood there for a second, trying to process it all. Part of me wanted to just storm out and never look back, but I had nowhere else to go. I didn't have savings for a new place yet, and I definitely didn't have any family I could turn to, at least not after this. Tom was the only one I thought I could count on, and now that bridge was burning right in front of me. "When do I have to be out?" I asked, my voice flat and defeated. Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Karen was hoping by the end of the week," he said, almost like he was ashamed to even say it. The end of the week. That was 4 days away. 4 freaking days to find somewhere to live, pack up my life, and figure out how to survive on my own. "Right," I muttered, shaking my head. "Thanks for the heads up, I guess." I turned around, heading back to the hallway where all my stuff was piled up. I could feel Tom watching me, but I didn't bother looking back at him. What was the point? He wasn't going to change his mind, and even if he wanted to, Karen wouldn't let him. I started picking up the boxes, dragging them back into my room, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I spent the next few days frantically searching for apartments, reaching out to anyone I could think of who might be able to let me crash for a while. It wasn't easy. Rent was high, and I didn't have enough saved up yet to afford anything decent. I kept thinking maybe Tom would come to his senses. Maybe he'd talk to Karen and realize how unfair this whole situation was. But every time I saw them together, it was clear that wasn't happening. Karen avoided me completely, barely even acknowledging my existence. And Tom? He was acting like this was all perfectly normal. By the time Friday rolled around, I still hadn't found a place. I was packing the last of my things into boxes, trying not to cry, when Tom knocked on the door. He stood there awkwardly for a minute, holding an envelope in his hand. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "It's for the security deposit and first month's rent. I hope it helps." I took the envelope without saying anything. I didn't want his money. What I wanted was for my brother to stand up for me, to tell Karen she was wrong, and that I didn't deserve to be treated like this. But that wasn't going to happen, and I knew it. I left that weekend with my boxes and bags, feeling more alone than I ever had before. Tom barely even said goodbye. Karen didn't come out at all. I was just gone, out of their lives like I never mattered in the first place. After getting kicked out of Tom's place, I spent the next few months pretty much in survival mode. I had nowhere to go at first, so I started crashing on friends' couches. You ever feel like you're imposing on people, even when they say it's okay? That's how I felt every single day. I was grateful for my friends letting me stay, but I knew deep down I couldn't keep doing it forever. I was just a guest, and they had their own lives to live. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't want to keep bringing up what happened with Tom and Karen. I didn't want people to think I was bitter or stuck on it, but truthfully, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's not like I could just forget that my own brother tossed me out like I was nothing. But whenever someone asked how I was doing, I just smiled and said, I'm figuring things out, like it wasn't killing me inside. Couch surfing was rough. I couldn't settle anywhere, and I was constantly moving around with all my stuff in boxes and bags. There's something weird about living out of boxes for that long. You feel like you're always on the edge of being thrown out again. I'd pack everything up every time I left for work, just in case. It's like I didn't trust that I'd be welcomed back. It messes with your head living like that. I'll admit, things weren't great for a while. My job was okay, but it didn't pay enough for me to get my own place right away. I was trying to save, but you know how it goes. Every time I thought I was making progress, something would come up that wiped out my savings. Car trouble, bills, groceries. It felt like I was stuck, just treading water and trying not to drown. I thought about calling Tom a few times, asking him for help. But then I'd remember how things ended, and how easily he let Karen push me out. I couldn't go back to him. I couldn't go back to them. The fact that he never even checked on me after I left? That said everything. I wasn't important to him anymore. I was just another problem Karen solved. It's funny, though. You'd think getting thrown out by my own family would have broken me, but somehow it just made me more determined. I decided I wasn't going to rely on anyone else anymore. I was done with people letting me down, done with feeling like I owed anyone for a roof over my head. If I was going to get back on my feet, I was going to do it myself. So I started working harder, picking up extra hours at my job whenever I could. I cut back on everything. No new clothes, no going out, nothing that wasn't necessary. It was tough, but after a few months, I had enough saved up to finally get my own place. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a small one-room studio apartment on the edge of town, but it was mine. No more bouncing from place to place, no more relying on anyone else. I finally had a place to call my own, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I remember the first night in my new apartment. I didn't have much, just a mattress on the floor and a couple of boxes of stuff, but it felt like freedom. It was quiet, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't have to worry about being kicked out. I didn't have to walk on eggshells or tiptoe around anyone's moods. It was just me, and that was enough. Even though I was proud of myself for getting back on my feet, it didn't take away the hurt. I still thought about Tom and Karen all the time. I thought about how easily they tossed me out when they didn't need me anymore. How Karen's lies about me flirting with her and hanging out with sketchy people were enough to convince Tom to kick me out without even giving me a chance to defend myself. It still stung, even if I was doing better. What made it worse was that no one in my family reached out. Not my parents, not my other siblings. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I guess Tom told everyone his side of the story, and I wasn't part of the picture they cared about. My parents always had this thing about keeping the peace, and I'm sure they thought it was easier to let Tom and Karen do whatever they wanted rather than confront them about what happened. But it still hurt, you know? It felt like I'd been erased from their lives, just like that. I focused on moving forward, though. I didn't have time to sit around feeling sorry for myself. I had bills to pay, and the rent wasn't going to take care of itself. So I kept working, kept grinding, and slowly, things started looking up. I got a promotion at work that helped with my finances. I started decorating my little apartment, making it feel like home. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was proud of how far I'd come. One thing I learned during all this was that you can't depend on anyone else to fix your life. No one's coming to save you, and the people you think will always have your back might be the ones who push you down the hardest. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the truth. You've got to look out for yourself, because when it all comes crashing down, the only person you can count on is you. Still, despite everything, there was a part of me that wished things had gone differently with Tom. I missed having a brother. I missed the way things used to be before Karen came into the picture and flipped everything upside down. But I knew I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't forget how they treated me, and I wasn't going to let them back into my life after what they did. They made their choice, and I had to live with mine. I hadn't spoken to Tom in almost a year by the time I felt like I was back on my feet. Every now and then, I'd get a text from him or Karen asking how I was doing or checking in, but I never responded. I couldn't. Not after what they put me through. I figured they'd moved on, too. They had their baby by now, and I'm sure their life was just fine without me in it. but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. You don't just treat family like that and expect everything to be okay. I didn't know it at the time, but that whole situation was going to come back around eventually. And when it did, it was going to change everything. It had been about a year since I got my own place and went completely no contact with Tom and Karen. I'd done everything I could to put them behind me, but it's not like you can just erase family from your mind. Every now and then, I'd think about reaching out, but then I'd remember how they tossed me out like I was nothing. The thought of Tom believing Karen's lies still made me sick. Then, one day I got a call. I was sitting at my desk, half listening to a podcast, when my phone started ringing. I glanced at the screen, and to my surprise, it was Tom. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, so seeing his name pop up gave me a weird feeling. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. So I did. "Hello?" I answered, trying to sound neutral, not wanting to show any emotion. There was a pause on the other end, and then Tom's voice came through, sounding different. He didn't sound like the confident, put-together older brother I used to know. He sounded desperate. "Hey," he said, "it's me." Yeah, I knew it was him. "What's up?" I replied, not wanting to make this easy for him. Tom hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I'm just going to cut to the chase. We need help. Karen and we're losing the house. The business went under, and we're getting evicted. We've got nowhere else to go." I could feel my heart rate pick up. I hadn't heard from Tom in over a year, and now he was calling because he needed something? After everything they put me through? It was almost laughable. Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, let them figure it out on their own. But the other part of me, well, it was complicated. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We were hoping—" He paused, like he didn't even believe what he was about to say. "We were hoping you'd let us stay with you, just for a few months, until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced back to that day, coming home to find all my stuff packed in the hallway. The way Tom just stood there while Karen lied about me flirting with her. And now they wanted to stay with me? In my apartment? I let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than anything. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "I know how it sounds," Tom replied quickly, like he knew how ridiculous it was. "But we've got 2 kids now. We don't have anywhere else to go. Please, we wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency." An emergency. So now I was supposed to forget everything and help them because they were in trouble. Where was that energy when I needed a place to stay? When Karen was throwing me out over lies and Tom just stood by and let it happen? "Tom, I don't know what to tell you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You kicked me out when I needed help. Remember that? You and Karen didn't care then. Why should I care now?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke again, and this time his voice was softer, like he was finally starting to get it. "I know," he said. "I know we screwed up. Karen, she was wrong. I was wrong for not standing up for you. I should have never let that happen. I should have had your back." Hearing him admit that gave me a weird mix of satisfaction and anger. It was the apology I had been waiting for, but it also felt too late. Like it didn't matter anymore. The damage was already done. What good was an apology now after all this time? "I needed you, Tom," I said, my voice starting to crack. "I needed my brother, and you let her lie about me. You let her make me out to be some kind of freak like I was flirting with her. You believed her over me." "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, I really am. But right now, we're desperate. We don't have anyone else to turn to. I'm asking you, as your brother, please, can we stay with you?" I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, trying to figure out what to say. A part of me wanted to tell him to shove it, to let him deal with the consequences of his choices. But another part of me, maybe the part that still cared about family, despite everything, was torn. I'd been through hell when they kicked me out. But did that mean I had to kick them when they were down too? Was it my responsibility to be the bigger person here? "I need some time to think about it," I finally said, my voice tight. "I understand," Tom replied, sounding relieved that I hadn't slammed the door in his face just yet. "Take as much time as you need. I'm really sorry for everything, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." After we hung up, I just sat there for a while, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony of the situation. They threw me out without a second thought, and now they were begging me for a place to stay. It felt like some kind of twisted karmic joke. But the truth was, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be that person who holds grudges forever, But at the same time, I didn't want to be walked all over again. If I let them stay, would it just be another situation where they take advantage of me? Or would this be the moment where we all finally grew up and moved past what happened? I thought about it for days. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Tom, reminding me that they didn't have much time left before they had to move out of their house. My parents even got involved, sending me guilt-trippy messages about how family sticks together and how I should let bygones be bygones. But it wasn't that simple. Family sticking together only works when both sides actually give a damn about each other. And for a long time, it felt like I was the only one who cared. Update 1. I sat with the phone in my hand, staring at it like it was going to give me some kind of magical answer. After days of thinking about it, I had finally called Tom back. He didn't pick up right away, so I left him a message telling him I had made my decision, and that he could call me back whenever he got the chance. Part of me felt like a huge weight had been lifted, but the other part was just anxious. Like, whatever was going to happen next would either be a huge mess or something that changed everything between us for good. I wasn't sure which way it was going to go, but I had to stick with my choice. About an hour later, Tom called me back. His voice sounded tense, like he had been holding his breath since I left the message. "So, what's your decision?" he asked, not even bothering with small talk. I took a deep breath. "Look, Tom, I thought about it a lot," I started, trying to keep calm, even though I felt like my heart was going to pound out of my chest. "And I can't let you and Karen stay with me." There was silence on the other end, like he wasn't sure he heard me right. "Wait, what? You're serious?" he finally said, sounding more shocked than angry. "After everything, you're really going to turn us away?" "After everything?" I shot back, feeling my voice get sharper. "You mean after you kicked me out of your house with no warning, based on lies Karen made up? You threw me out, Tom. I had nowhere to go. So, yeah, I'm serious." I could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was trying to figure out how to respond without blowing up. "I told you I was sorry for that. We were under a lot of stress. Karen was pregnant and things were just complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my frustration boiling over. "You believed lies about me flirting with your wife and hanging out with drug dealers? You didn't even give me a chance to defend myself. And now, because things are bad for you, I'm supposed to just forget about all that?" "I'm not asking you to forget," Tom said, his voice more desperate now. "I'm asking you to help us. We've got kids now. This isn't just about me or Karen. We're your family." I felt a pang of guilt at that, but I wasn't going to back down, not after everything I'd been through. "Family? You weren't thinking about family when you threw me out. You weren't thinking about family when you let Karen lie about me. I had to figure it out on my own, Tom. Now it's your turn." There was another long pause. I could hear the frustration in his breathing again, but this time he didn't argue. He knew I was right. "Look," I continued, softening my tone just a little, "I'm not saying I don't care, but I can't let you stay with me. I've worked hard to rebuild my life, and I'm finally in a good place. I can't let you and Karen come in and mess that up again. You understand that, right?" "Yeah," Tom muttered. "I get it." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but I wasn't going to budge. I wasn't about to let him guilt-trip me into giving in. I'd come too far for that. "I'll help in other ways," I offered, feeling like I had to throw him something. "I'll help you find resources or places you can stay. But my home? That's off limits." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a second I thought Tom had hung up. But then he sighed, long and deep, like he was finally accepting it. "Okay," he said, his voice quieter now. "I understand. I'm not happy about it, but I understand." I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. It wasn't easy telling my own brother no, but I had to protect myself first. If I let him and Karen back into my life like that, I knew things would just end up the same as before, and I couldn't handle that again. "I really do hope things get better for you guys," I said, trying to end the conversation on a less tense note. "I'm sorry things are so hard right now." "Yeah, me too," Tom muttered. "Thanks for whatever help you can give." We said our awkward goodbyes, and that was that. I hung up the phone and just sat there for a minute, processing everything. I had said no. For once in my life, I had stood up for myself against my own family, and it felt weird. Part of me was proud, but another part was sad. I didn't like the idea of being estranged from Tom forever, but I knew this was the right thing to do. I had to draw the line somewhere. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about that conversation, replaying it in my head. I wasn't sure if Tom was mad at me or if he really understood where I was coming from, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let myself be guilted into something I wasn't comfortable with. My parents, of course, found out about the whole thing and tried to jump in with their family sticks together routine. They couldn't believe I said no, even after I explained everything that had happened with Tom and Karen. It's like they just didn't want to see the bigger picture. You should have helped them, my mom told me during one of our phone calls. They're struggling, and you've always been the one to help. This isn't like you. That last part stung a bit. Maybe it wasn't like me, but maybe that was the point. I'd always been the one to bend over backward for family, no matter how they treated me. But that's exactly why I had to say no this time. I wasn't the same person I was before. I had grown, learned to set boundaries, and this was one of them. I'm sorry, Mom, I said, trying to stay calm. But I've got to put myself first for once. Tom and Karen can figure it out. My parents didn't really get it, but that didn't surprise me. They weren't the ones who had been kicked out and left to fend for themselves. They weren't the ones who had to rebuild everything from scratch. I was, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel bad for protecting what I'd worked so hard to build. After that, things went quiet for a while. I didn't hear much from Tom or Karen, which was fine with me. They had their own problems to deal with, and I had mine. I helped them find a shelter that could take them in for a while, and that was the last I heard about it. No more desperate calls, no more guilt-tripping texts, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free.
How could you bring this shame on our family, Emma? My dad thundered, his voice filling every corner of the kitchen. He stood at the head of the table, his face lined with disappointment and fury. Eliza leaned casually against the counter, arms folded, her lips pressed into a thin line as she watched the scene unfold. I sat there, stunned, my heart racing, the weight of their judgment suffocating me. My name is Emma Morgan. I'm 26 years old, and tonight my world is unraveling. My father, the only parent I have left, looked at me as though I was a stranger. Eliza, my twin sister, the one who always managed to come out on top, didn't even try to defend me. And now, accused of something I didn't do, I realized I was completely alone. It all started when court orders arrived at my father's house, each one more alarming than the last. They claimed I had defaulted on multiple loans, accounts I had no memory of opening. In the past weeks, I had received some weird calls talking about loans that I was supposed to repay. I dismissed them as scam calls, but the accusations were official, and the weight of the legal threats hung over me like a storm cloud. That's when everything truly fell apart. I didn't do it, Dad, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I don't know how this happened, but it wasn't me. Eliza shifted, her eyes glinting as she finally spoke. Come on, Emma. Are you seriously denying it? Everyone knows your name is on the documents, she said, her voice laced with pity. Why don't you just tell the truth and stop dragging this out? My dad's expression hardened as he looked at me. So what? Are you saying this is all a coincidence? The loans, the complaints, the accusations from people in those places? Why would they target you for no reason? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Because someone framed me, Dad. Someone used my name. I don't know how, but I swear to you, I didn't do any of this. My eyes darted to Eliza, who raised her hands in mock surrender. Framed? Really? Eliza said, her tone dripping with disbelief. Who would go through all that trouble, Emma? And why you of all people? This sounds more like an excuse than anything else. Dad shook his head, pacing the room. Emma, I've always tried to be patient with you, but this is too much. You're not a child anymore. You need to take responsibility for your actions. Until you can, you're not welcome here. The words hit me like a slap, and I felt the ground beneath me shift. Dad, you're kicking me out? I whispered. I stood there frozen as my father's words sank in. Eliza sighed dramatically and shook her head. I hate to see this happen, but maybe some time away will help you reflect, Emma, she said, her voice honeyed with false concern. I looked at her, my throat tightening with anger and disbelief. You're loving this, aren't you? I said, my voice low. You've been the perfect one your whole life, and now you're watching me take the blame for something I didn't do. Eliza isn't the problem here, Emma, Dad snapped. You are. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Pack your things and leave tonight. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. My chest ached as I turned away, blinking back tears, knowing that no matter what I said, no one would believe me. I packed my bags in silence, each item a painful reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The walls of my childhood room felt foreign now, as if they belonged to someone else, a version of me that no longer existed. Eliza leaned casually against the doorway, watching me with an unreadable expression. "I wish it didn't have to be this way," she said softly, her tone laced with sympathy that didn't quite feel real. I kept my back to her, shoving clothes into my duffel bag. "Yeah, me too," I muttered, my voice heavy with defeat. "It's just, everything looks so bad right now, Emma. Maybe some time away will help you figure out how this happened," she added. I froze for a moment, gripping the edge of the dresser. "I didn't do this," I said quietly. "I don't know how or why it's happening, but I didn't do it." Eliza sighed, stepping back into the hall. "I hope you figure it out for your sake. Really, I do." Her words echoed in my mind as I zipped up my bag and walked out of the room, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. But for now, all I could do was leave. The night air was cold and sharp as I stepped outside, my duffel slung over one shoulder. The house behind me, once a place of warmth and memories, now loomed like a shadow, filled with accusations and betrayal. I paused at the edge of the driveway, glancing back at the window where the light still glowed faintly. Dad hadn't even come out to see me leave. He'd made his decision and didn't care to look back. Eliza's voice echoed in my head. "I hope you figure it out for your sake." Her words felt hollow, yet they clung to me like a thorn. How had things gotten so twisted? Why was everything pointing to me when I hadn't done anything wrong? As I walked down the street clutching the strap of my bag, I told myself one thing. I might not have answers now, but I wouldn't stop until I found them. Something didn't add up, and I was going to figure it out, even if no one believed me. The bus station was nearly empty when I arrived, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the tiled floor. I bought a one-way ticket to the nearest city, my fingers trembling as I handed over the cash. The clerk barely looked at me, sliding the ticket across the counter without a word. I found a seat in the corner, away from the few scattered passengers. The reality of it all began to sink in as I stared at the crumpled ticket in my hand. I was alone now. No home, no family to fall back on. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How could everything fall apart so quickly? Who would go to such lengths to frame me? And why? The engine of an approaching bus rumbled in the distance, pulling me from my thoughts. As the vehicle rolled to a stop, I tightened my grip on my bag and stood. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was the one I had to face now, one step at a time. The first few days after leaving home were a blur of cheap motel rooms, instant noodles, and restless nights. I was barely holding it together, my mind spinning with everything I'd lost. But staying in bed and wallowing wasn't going to solve anything. I needed to survive, and that meant finding a job, any job. I landed a position at a small clothing store downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something to keep me busy and bring in a paycheck. My coworker, Mia, was a few years older than me, with bright red hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't pry, but she had a way of getting me to talk without realizing it. One slow afternoon, as we folded shirts near the register, I found myself opening up about what had happened. "It's been a nightmare," I admitted, stacking a pile of sweaters. "I don't even know how my name got dragged into it. I've never done anything like that in my life." Mia paused, leaning against the counter. "That's rough," she said, frowning. "You said it was loans and fraud, right? Did you ever think, I don't know, maybe someone pretending to be you could have done it?" I stopped mid-fold, her words hitting me like a jolt. "Pretending to be me?" I repeated, the idea foreign but oddly plausible. "I mean, I guess it's possible, but who would go to that kind of trouble?" She shrugged, tilting her head. "I don't know. Is there anyone who looks enough like you to pull it off?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My mind flickered to the one person who fit that description perfectly. Eliza. But no. Why would she do something like that? Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't shake it. I hesitated, my hands frozen mid-fold. There's my twin sister, I said slowly, the words tasting strange as they left my mouth. We're identical, Eliza. But she would never do something like that. Everyone loves her. Mia raised an eyebrow, leaning her elbows on the counter. A twin? Identical? Emma, come on. If someone's pulling this off, they'd need to look exactly like you. And you're telling me your twin is completely innocent? I shook my head, the idea twisting my stomach. She's always been the perfect one. My dad trusts her completely. Everyone does. There's no way she'd risk all that for something like this. Besides, why would she frame me? Mia gave a short laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be funny. I don't know, jealousy? Spite? You'd be surprised what people are capable of when they think they won't get caught. I mean, who better to impersonate you than someone who looks just like you? Her words made me uneasy, but they also planted a nagging doubt in my mind. I didn't want to believe it. Couldn't believe it. But the pieces started clicking together in a way I couldn't ignore. What if the person I'd trusted the most had been behind everything all along? That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment, staring at the cracks on the ceiling. Mia's words echoed in my mind, refusing to let me rest. Who better to impersonate you than someone who looks just like you? Eliza had always been the center of attention, the one who could talk her way out of anything. And me? I was the quiet one, the easy target. But could she really do something so cruel? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old photos. There we were, Eliza and me, side by side, practically mirror images. I remembered how she used to joke about how easy it would be to trick people. Back then it seemed harmless, just her being playful. But now, it felt like those jokes were hiding something darker. As much as I didn't want to admit it, a part of me couldn't shake the possibility. If it was Eliza, she'd gone to great lengths to make sure I took the fall. And if that was true, I needed proof. I couldn't confront her or anyone else without evidence. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about finding the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't call my dad or Eliza, not yet. If there was even a chance Mia was right, confronting them without proof would only make things worse. Instead, I'd focus on finding answers. At work, I told Mia I wanted to look into it, unsure how she'd react. To my surprise, she grinned and clapped her hands together. Finally, I was wondering if you'd decide to fight back. Let me help, she said, her enthusiasm catching me off guard. You don't have to get involved, I said, nervously twisting a hanger in my hand. Don't be ridiculous, I live for this kind of stuff, Mia replied with a wink. Besides, two heads are better than one, right? Let's start with the basics. Where did these fraud claims come from? Do you have any paperwork or details? I nodded, pulling a folder from my bag. I'd managed to keep copies of the notices that had been sent to my dad's house. Mia scanned through them, her eyes narrowing as she flipped the pages. Most of these are linked to loans and accounts, she said, tapping the papers with her finger. We should check where these were opened. Maybe there's a trail we can follow. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Mia's determination gave me strength, and together, we began piecing together the puzzle. If Eliza or anyone else was behind this, we'd find out. One way or another. It all started when court orders began arriving at my father's house, each one more alarming than the last. They claimed I had defaulted on multiple loans, accounts I had no memory of opening. The accusations were official, and the weight of the legal threats hung over me like a storm cloud. Over the next few days, Mia and I worked tirelessly. During our lunch breaks and after shifts, we sat at her tiny kitchen table, combing through the paperwork and trying to track the accounts. She had a knack for details, noticing things I'd overlooked, like slight variations in handwriting, and the locations where the accounts were opened. "Look at this," she said one afternoon, sliding a document toward me. "The signature here doesn't match yours exactly. It's close, but not identical. And all of these accounts? They were opened in the next city over." I stared at the paper, my heart pounding. "Eliza was in that city a couple of years ago. She said it was for a volunteer project." I paused, the words catching in my throat. "Do you think—" Mia leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "It's starting to look like someone used your name while they were there. And if she was the one spending time in that city, well..." She let the sentence hang, the implication heavy. I swallowed hard. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it's starting to feel like all the roads lead to her." Mia nodded. "We'll need more. If she really did this, there'll be a bigger trail. Let's check for any transactions or other records linked to these accounts." Her confidence gave me the push I needed. I wasn't ready to accuse Eliza outright, but the pieces were falling into place. I could feel it. We were getting closer to the truth. The first place on the list was a small credit union on the edge of town. Mia and I stepped inside, the faint smell of paper and stale coffee lingering in the air. A young woman behind the counter glanced up and smiled. "Welcome back," she chirped. I froze. "Excuse me?" The woman's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, sorry. I thought you'd been in here before. You look so familiar." Mia shot me a quick look but said nothing. I forced a smile and approached the counter. "Actually, I'm here about a loan that was opened in my name. I need to understand the details." The woman nodded, typing something into her computer. As her eyes scanned the screen, she frowned slightly. "Yes, I see the account. It was opened 2 years ago. You provided the documents in person, so we'll just need to verify a few details." "In person?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Yes," she said slowly, her gaze darting between me and the screen. "You brought your ID and signed the forms here in the branch." She hesitated, then added, "It was during a quiet afternoon. I remember because we chatted briefly about how warm it was for that time of year." Mia leaned casually against the counter, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Is there any chance you could pull up a copy of those documents? We'd like to check everything carefully." The employee hesitated. "I can't let you take them, but I can show you the scans in the system." She turned the monitor slightly, and there it was. My name, my signature, and my face. Except, it wasn't my face. Not exactly. Mia stepped closer, her voice low. "Emma, that's your sister, isn't it?" My stomach dropped. The face on the screen was identical to mine, but with subtle differences I couldn't deny. It was Eliza. My hands trembled as the truth I'd been avoiding stared back at me. We visited 2 more locations that day, each experience eerily similar. At every bank or loan office, the employees acted like they knew me, greeting me with familiarity or referencing conversations I'd never had. At one office, a middle-aged man behind the desk even chuckled. "Back again? Didn't think we'd see you so soon," he said, shuffling through papers on his desk. I forced a polite smile, my stomach twisting. "Actually, I'm here about some discrepancies with an account opened in my name," I said carefully. His smile faded slightly and he glanced up at me. "You're saying there's an issue? But you provided all the documentation yourself when you were here last month." Mia leaned forward, her tone casual but firm. "Was there any ID involved? Maybe you still have it on file?" The man frowned but nodded. "Of course. Let me pull up the account." When the documents appeared on his screen, my heart sank. The face staring back at me from the ID was unmistakable. Eliza's face wearing my name. My stomach churned as realization hit me like a freight train. It was Eliza all along. The face on the ID, the signature on the forms, the confident way she'd carried out the scams. It was her. My twin sister, my own flesh and blood, had used our identical looks to steal my name, my identity, and leave me to bear the fallout. I stared at the screen in disbelief. my chest tightening with a mix of betrayal and rage. Mia placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, her expression a mix of sympathy and quiet fury. "She's been setting you up from the start," Mia said softly, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. I wanted to scream, to cry, to storm out of the room and demand answers from Eliza. But all I could do was sit there, frozen, as the full weight of what she'd done crashed down on me. My own sister had framed me, and my father had believed her without question. As we left the office, my mind raced, piecing together everything I had ignored or brushed off over the past year. Eliza's sudden obsession with high-end fashion, the designer handbags, the tailored coats, the expensive jewelry she'd flaunted at family dinners. I'd asked her once how she could afford it all, and she'd laughed it off, saying, "Oh, just a little treat for myself. You know I've been saving up." At the time, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was always the one who had everything figured out. But now, those memories took on a sinister edge. The way she'd avoided specifics, the extravagant purchases that didn't match her modest job, the smug look she'd get whenever I questioned her success, it all made sense. She hadn't been saving up. She'd been using my name to fund her lavish lifestyle, leaving me to face the consequences. The next day, I met with a lawyer named David Cole, a calm, middle-aged man with a sharp gaze that seemed to see through every word. His office was modest but orderly, with files stacked neatly on his desk and a faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. "I've been notified that I defaulted on multiple loans," I explained, my voice steady despite the nerves bubbling under the surface. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but I need to understand the legal implications if I don't pay, or if I do." David leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands. "If you pay off the defaulted loans, it won't erase the records of the defaults, but it can prevent further legal action, like lawsuits or wage garnishments. However, your credit history will still show the defaults unless the lenders agree to remove them, which isn't guaranteed." I nodded, digesting the information. "And if I don't pay?" "That's a different matter," he said. "The lenders could escalate to lawsuits to recover the funds. If they win, they could seek judgments against you, which might include seizing assets or garnishing wages. It could also hurt your ability to secure credit or loans in the future." His explanation was clear, but it left a sinking feeling in my stomach. Would paying them off at least help clear my name, even if the defaults stay on record? David tilted his head, considering. "It could show good faith, that you're taking responsibility and trying to resolve the issue. But clearing your name entirely would require addressing how the loans came about in the first place. If there's any question of identity theft or fraud, that would need to be investigated." I nodded, my heart pounding. I wasn't ready to bring up Eliza or the possibility of fraud, not yet. For now, I just needed to focus on what could be done, and how much worse things could get if I didn't act. I hesitated for a moment before speaking. What if, hypothetically, someone had stolen my identity and used it to open those loans? Would that change anything? David leaned forward, his sharp gaze narrowing slightly. "If your identity was stolen, that's a serious matter. You wouldn't be legally responsible for the loans, but you'd need to provide evidence to prove you weren't the one who opened them. That typically involves filing a police report, notifying the lenders, and disputing the accounts with the credit bureaus." "And what happens if I can't prove it wasn't me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then it becomes much more complicated," he replied. "The burden of proof is on you to show you didn't open the accounts. Without that, lenders will continue to treat you as the responsible party. But if you can gather any evidence, like being in a different location at the time or showing discrepancies in the application documents, it can make a big difference." I nodded, his words sinking in like weights on my shoulders. "So paying them off wouldn't clear my name if they think I'm the one who opened the loans?" "Not entirely," David said. "It would stop the legal actions against you for defaulting, but the history of the loans and the assumption that you opened them would remain unless you prove otherwise. If there's even a chance someone else is behind this, you need to investigate it now. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be to gather evidence." I nodded again, my mind racing. His advice made sense, but it also meant I couldn't avoid the truth forever. David's expression softened slightly as he leaned forward, his voice steady. If you can prove that your identity was stolen and you weren't the one who opened those loans, you won't be held liable for the debts. The lenders will have to close the fraudulent accounts and stop pursuing you. Your credit report can also be corrected to remove the negative marks associated with those accounts. Relief flickered for a moment before another question crept in. And what happens to the person who stole my identity? That depends, David said, his tone firm. If you provide evidence of identity theft, it becomes a criminal matter. Law enforcement could get involved, and the person responsible could face charges for fraud, forgery, or other related crimes. Penalties could include fines, restitution to the lenders, or even prison time, depending on the severity of the case. I swallowed hard. So, if I come forward with proof, I'll be cleared, but the person behind this, they could face serious consequences? Yes, he said, meeting my eyes. But clearing your name is your priority. If someone close to you is responsible, I know it might feel complicated. But remember, this isn't just about money. It's about justice and protecting yourself from further harm. I nodded slowly, his words settling heavy in my chest. If it came to that, I'd have to make a choice. Protect the person who betrayed me, or finally fight for my own truth. The decision weighed heavily on me, but I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth. Eliza had to face the consequences of what she'd done, not just for me, but for the family she had deceived so easily. I couldn't let her actions ruin my life, but at the same time, the thought of sending her to jail made my stomach churn. That's when the plan formed in my mind. I would confront her, but on my terms. My family used to have a big gathering every year. At the family reunion, with everyone present, I'd lay out the proof of what she did. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to see the disappointment in our father's eyes, and to be held accountable for what she'd done to me. But I wouldn't turn her into the authorities, not if she agreed to make it right. Eliza would have to settle the loans she'd taken out in my name. She would fix this mess and take responsibility quietly, without dragging me through further humiliation or legal battles. It was a compromise, one that spared her the worst consequences while giving me the justice I deserved. The family reunion was only a week away. That gave me just enough time to gather everything I needed, every document, every piece of evidence, every fact that would leave no room for her to deny what she'd done. This time, Eliza wouldn't talk her way out of it. She would face the truth, and so would everyone else. The days leading up to the reunion felt like a blur. Every spare moment was spent combing through the evidence I had gathered. Photos of the forged documents, bank statements, and even the recordings of the bank employees who had unwittingly confirmed Eliza's actions. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, building an undeniable case against her. Mia was by my side through it all, her relentless energy keeping me focused when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. "You've got this, Emma," she said as I packed the files into a neat folder the night before the reunion. "Just stick to the plan. Don't let her twist this around." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I zipped the folder shut. "She's been doing this for so long, Mia. What if no one believes me? What if Dad sides with her again?" Mia placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "This time, you're not just speaking your truth, you're showing it. They can't argue with facts, Emma. You've done everything you can. Now it's time to let the truth do the rest." Her words stayed with me as I went to bed that night, my nerves tangled with anticipation. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. The moment I stepped through the door, a wave of cold stares hit me like a slap to the face. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heads turned, and I felt the weight of 50 pairs of judgmental eyes boring into me. My heart pounded, but I straightened my shoulders and walked further into the room, refusing to let their disgust break me. Whispers followed me as I passed. "Can you believe she had the nerve to show up? After everything she's done? Unbelievable." I heard she's being taken to court. The room was packed, with relatives I hadn't seen in years filling the space. My dad stood near the fireplace, talking to Uncle Richard, but when he saw me, his face darkened. Eliza, ever the actress, stood near the buffet table, surrounded by a group of cousins who hung on her every word. She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, but her expression quickly shifted into one of practiced pity. "Emma," Dad called, his voice clipped and cold. "I'm surprised you even showed up." I forced a polite smile and held my ground. Of course I showed up. It's a family reunion, isn't it? The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eliza sauntered over, a drink in her hand, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's brave of you to come here after everything that's been going on," she said sweetly. "I know things have been difficult for you lately." I clenched my fists at my sides, my folder tucked securely under my arm. "You have no idea, Eliza. But that's why I'm here. I have something to say, and I think everyone here deserves to hear it." The room went silent as her smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of unease. This time, I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. This time, the truth would speak for itself. I stepped forward, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. The room fell into an uneasy hush, all eyes glued to me. I could see the disbelief, the anger, the pity in their faces. But I focused on Eliza. Her smug confidence was still there, but I noticed the faintest flicker of tension in her eyes. She knew something was coming. I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I know many of you have heard things about me recently, things that make me look like a liar and a thief. I've been accused of defaulting on loans I never took and ruining the family's reputation. It's hurt me deeply to think that so many of you believe I could do something like that." I paused, scanning the room, letting the silence settle. Eliza shifted slightly, her smile thinning. "But I didn't come here to plead my innocence with words alone. I came here with proof." I pulled the folder from under my arm and held it up. "Everything I'm about to show you is documented and verifiable. Bank statements, witness testimonies, even recordings from the places where these loans were supposedly taken out." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I opened the folder, holding up the first document, a scan of the loan application with Eliza's forged signature and photo. "This is the application for one of the loans. The signature isn't mine. The photo ID, though it uses my name, isn't me. It's her." I pointed directly at Eliza. Gasps echoed through the room, and her confident facade cracked for just a moment before she quickly recovered. "That's ridiculous," she said, her voice rising as she laughed nervously. "Why would I ever do something like that? Emma, this is desperate, even for you." But I didn't stop. I laid out every piece of evidence, the mismatched handwriting, the dates she'd been in the cities where the loans were taken out, the employees' descriptions of her. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, and the crowd turned their eyes to Eliza, their expressions shifting from pity for me to suspicion toward her. By the time I finished, the room was buzzing with tension. I looked directly at my father, his face pale, his eyes darting between me and Eliza. "Dad," I said, my voice softer now, "I know you don't want to believe this, but the truth is right here. She used my name, my identity, to fund her lifestyle, and I've been left to pick up the pieces." Eliza stepped forward, her voice shrill. "This is insane. She's lying, trying to turn everyone against me because she's jealous. You all know she's always been jealous of me." But the weight of the evidence spoke louder than her words, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of those who had always believed her. The room was filled with stunned silence as I finished speaking, my evidence laid bare for all to see. Faces that once held disgust and judgment now showed shock and disbelief, their gazes shifting from me to Eliza with growing unease. Whispers spread like wildfire, and I could see the shift, slow at first, but undeniable. They believed me. For the first time, the weight of their judgment lifted, replaced by the crushing realization of what Eliza had done. Eliza's face twisted with anger as the whispers grew louder, the weight of the evidence pressing down on her. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice sharp and trembling. I don't have to stand here and listen to these lies. She shoved past the crowd, her heels clicking furiously against the floor as she stormed toward the door. You're all pathetic for believing her, she shouted over her shoulder before disappearing into the night, leaving the room in stunned silence. As soon as the door slammed shut behind Eliza, the room erupted into a mix of murmurs and hesitant apologies. A few relatives approached me, their voices soft, laden with guilt. I'm so sorry, Emma, one cousin said, her eyes welling with tears. We had no idea. But I couldn't stay to listen. My heart raced as I turned and followed Eliza, pushing past the crowd. I needed to confront her, alone. Emma, wait, my dad's voice called after me. I hesitated for a moment, then kept going. I heard his footsteps behind me as I stepped into the cool night air, scanning the parking lot for Eliza. There she was, fumbling with her car keys, her hands shaking as she tried to unlock the door. Eliza, I shouted, my voice echoing in the quiet lot. She froze, then turned to face me, her expression a mix of fury and panic. My dad caught up, his breath ragged, and looked between the two of us, confusion and anger etched on his face. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, his voice breaking the tense silence. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on Eliza. You're not running away from this. We need to talk. Right now. Eliza's eyes darted between me and our dad, her panic barely concealed beneath her defiant glare. She crossed her arms, leaning against the car as if she could shield herself from what was coming. Admit it, Eliza, I said, my voice steady but firm. Tell Dad the truth about what you did, or I'll have no choice but to take this to the authorities. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. But the weight of the situation was pressing down on her, and she knew it. Eliza, Dad said, his voice shaking, filled with anger and desperation. Is what Emma's saying true? Did you really do this? Eliza scoffed, rolling her eyes. Fine, she snapped, throwing up her hands. Yes, I did it, okay? I used her name for the loans. I didn't think it would get this far. I figured it'd all blow over and no one would even notice. Dad staggered back a step, his face pale. How could you, to your own sister? To this family? I didn't think she'd be such a martyr about it, Eliza shot back, her voice cracking. I needed the money, and she's always been flying under the radar. I thought she'd just take the heat and move on. I shook my head, my heart pounding. You didn't just hurt me, Eliza. You destroyed my life, and I was ready to let you get away with it if you'd just own up to it and fix it. But if you don't settle those loans and clear my name, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done, including the police. Eliza froze, the weight of my ultimatum hanging heavy in the air. For once, she had no comeback, no way to charm her way out of the mess she'd created. Eliza's defiance crumbled, her shoulders sagging as tears welled in her eyes. She looked down at the ground, unable to meet either of our gazes. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant for it to get this bad. I didn't think it through. Dad stared at her, his expression a mix of disappointment and disbelief. You didn't think? Eliza, do you realize what you've done to your sister, to this family? She wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. I'll fix it, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I'll pay back everything. I'll settle the loans. I'll clear Emma's name. I swear I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I watched her carefully, searching for any hint of manipulation, but for the first time, Eliza looked genuinely ashamed. You better mean that, I said, my voice firm but quieter now. Because if you don't, I won't hesitate to take the next step. This is your last chance, Eliza. She nodded frantically. I do. I'll do it, Emma. I promise. Over the next few weeks, Eliza kept her word. She contacted the banks, paid off the defaulted loans, and provided statements clearing me of any involvement. It wasn't an easy process, and it didn't erase the damage overnight, but step by step, my name was restored. While I couldn't forget what she'd done, I felt a sense of closure, In the end, justice was served, not through revenge, but through accountability. Eliza's actions left scars, but they also gave me the strength to stand up for myself and reclaim my life. My family began to see me for who I truly was, not the person they had unfairly judged. Though trust with Eliza would take time, I found peace in knowing I had finally stepped out of her shadow and into my own light.
In the heart of a bustling city street, a young black teenager stood frozen by his car, fear etched into his features as two officers loomed over him. From across the crowd, Alice Brooks, dressed inconspicuously in jeans and a jacket, watched the scene unfold. She stepped forward, her mind racing with memories of her late father's unwavering fight for justice. "This ends here," she thought, her resolve hardening with each step. "Step back, ma'am," barked Officer Walters, his sharp tone cutting through the murmurs of the growing crowd. But Alice didn't flinch. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her voice calm yet unyielding. "Explain your actions," she demanded, her presence commanding attention. The officer's irritation bubbled over, his authority suddenly on shaky ground. The situation intensified as whispers rippled through the onlookers. "Isn't that the governor?" a woman murmured, her phone aimed at Alice. The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Walters froze, his bravado faltering as the weight of his mistake dawned on him. Alice, however, remained focused, her gaze steady on the trembling teenager. This moment wasn't just about one arrest, it was about exposing a system that had failed far too many. The scene crackled with tension, the air thick with anticipation. With the crowd watching and cameras rolling, the officer's next move would set the tone for what was to come. On real-life stories new, witness the gripping tale of one woman's fight against injustice, where every second could shift the balance between power and accountability. What happens next will leave you questioning everything. The teenager's hands trembled as they hovered in the air, his voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. Alice Brooks felt a pang of anger rise in her chest, not just at the officer's actions but at the sheer weight of fear the young man carried. The officer, Walters, stood firm, his voice sharp as he dismissed her questions. "Ma'am, I've told you, step back. This isn't your business." Alice's heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "It became my business the moment you singled him out without reason." Her words cut through the tension like a knife, drawing the eyes of the crowd closer. Phones were raised higher, and murmurs turned into whispers of recognition. "Is that her? Is that the governor?" The realization rippled outward, but Alice's focus stayed on the officer. Her calm facade masked the storm inside, a mix of fury and resolve that fueled her next move. "Why are you detaining him?" she asked again, louder this time. Walters hesitated, his authority beginning to waver under the growing scrutiny. "Suspicious behavior," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Alice took a step closer. "Suspicious behavior," she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. "Since when is standing by your own car suspicious? Did you find anything? Do you have proof of a crime?" Walter's silence was deafening, and for a moment, the only sound was the boy's shaky breaths. The tension reached a breaking point when a woman in the crowd shouted, "She's the governor." The words hung in the air like a lightning strike. Walters turned, his face flushing as the crowd erupted into murmurs of confirmation. Alice took the opportunity, pulling out her ID and holding it up. The crowd surged with energy, their whispers turning into pointed questions and accusations. Walter's jaw clenched as he read her credentials, his authority crumbling with every second. Alice used the moment to press further. "Explain to everyone here," she said, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd, "why you've surrounded this young man without cause. What makes him so threatening that you felt the need to humiliate him in public?" The crowd's murmurs turned into vocal outrage, their collective anger directed at the officers. Walter's composure cracked. We received a report of a theft, he blurted out. He matches the description. His voice wavered, his words lacking the confidence they carried just moments earlier. The boy finally spoke, his voice trembling. I was just looking for my keys. They fell onto the seat. His words sent another wave of anger through the crowd. Alice stepped closer to Walters, her presence towering despite her calm demeanor. So you handcuff teenagers now for losing their keys? She asked, her tone sharp. Or is it because he's black? Before Walters could respond, another patrol car arrived. Sergeant Miller stepped out, his expression shifting as he recognized Alice. Madam Governor, he said cautiously, the weight of the situation sinking in. I apologize for this misunderstanding. His words were deliberate, but Alice caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Release him, Miller ordered firmly, cutting off Walter's attempt to protest. The sound of the cuffs unlocking was met with a collective sigh from the crowd, followed by applause. But Alice wasn't finished. She turned to Miller, her gaze unyielding. This isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a failure, a systemic one. And it ends here. The crowd erupted, their voices rising in agreement. Walters stood frozen, his face pale as the gravity of the moment settled in. Meanwhile, social media buzzed with activity, videos of the confrontation spreading like wildfire. Reporters jostled for position, capturing every moment as Alice addressed the officers once more. By morning, she said, her voice firm, I expect a full report on every action taken here today. And be prepared for an independent review of your department. Miller nodded, his expression grim as the weight of her words set in. The teenager, now freed, approached Alice hesitantly. Thank you, he said, his voice shaky but sincere. Alice placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her expression softening for the first time. You're safe now, she said. But this fight isn't over. The crowd roared in approval as Alice turned back to the officers. Walters stood on the sidelines, his phone buzzing with notifications, each one another nail in the coffin of his authority. The scene around him had shifted, and Alice Brooks had made it clear, change wasn't just coming, it was already here. As the crowd dispersed, their energy lingered in the air like an unspoken promise of change. Alice stood at the edge of the scene, watching the teenager reunite with his family. His smile, though small, carried the weight of hope, hope that someone had stood up for him when it mattered most. It was a reminder of why Alice had chosen this path, why she'd fought so hard to lead with conviction and empathy. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. This wasn't just about one boy or one officer, it was about dismantling a culture of fear and bias that had persisted for far too long. As she turned toward her car, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her father's face seemed to echo in her mind, his words a guiding light, justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Change wouldn't come easily, but today had proven it was possible. She could see it in the faces of the crowd, hear it in the applause that still echoed in her ears. This was just the beginning. Standing tall, Alice faced the cameras one last time. Let this serve as a reminder, she said, her voice steady. Accountability isn't optional. Together, we will build a system where justice is a right, not a privilege. If this story moved you, help amplify its message. Like, share, and subscribe to Real Life Stories New. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive.
Mom abandoned me as a baby for a new family, refused to take me in when I became an orphan. Now she wants this. So, I guess I should start by saying I've never really had a normal relationship with my mom. Actually, calling her my mom feels weird because, to be honest, she was more like a stranger than a parent. She took off when I was just a baby. I was too young to even remember her leaving, But what I do remember is how my dad, Mark, picked up all the pieces and did everything he could to raise me alone. He was my real parent. Always was. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't completely cut off from my mom, Sarah. I'd see her every now and then. But it was like, I don't know, a random acquaintance showing up in your life once in a blue moon and pretending like they care. The court gave her visitation every other weekend, but she rarely, if ever, actually followed through. I remember times when I was a little kid sitting by the window waiting, thinking maybe she'd show up this time. But nope. She'd either bail or drop me off early because she had other plans. The thing that really bugs me is she didn't even try, like, not at all. She would quit jobs just to avoid paying child support. My dad busted his ass working long hours while she was out there doing God knows what. Twice, she even ended up in jail because she didn't pay what she owed. Can you imagine? Jail. For not wanting to take care of your own kid. I heard about it through the grapevine because she didn't tell me directly. I found out from my uncle. It's messed up, right? Anyway, when I was about 6, Sarah met this guy, Phil. He was older than her, maybe by a decade, and from what I could gather, he thought he was some kind of hero for saving her. Whatever. I wasn't really a part of their life. I saw them like 5 times from the age of 6 to 14. Yeah, just 5. And every time was the same. Awkward, forced, and full of fake smiles. I hated it. They would try to act like we were some happy family. But all I could think was, who are you kidding? Phil, though. Man, he was something else. He really tried to force himself into my life. I remember one time I was maybe around 10, and he showed up at one of my school's Father's Day activities. My dad wasn't able to make it that day, but I wasn't mad about it. He always made time for me in other ways, so missing one thing wasn't a big deal. But Phil, being Phil, saw this as his moment. He came up to me like he was some kind of replacement and said, "Hey Jamie, I can step in if you want. I'm here for you." I remember just staring at him, not knowing whether to laugh or scream. Like, dude, no, you're not my dad. You're not even close. I barely know you, and you have no right to act like you're stepping in for him. I was polite at the time, just said something like, "I'm fine," and walked away. But inside, I was fuming. I didn't even tell my dad about it because I didn't want him to feel bad. The worst part? Phil would try to make it seem like I was the one missing out. He'd drop these little comments like, "If only your dad had done more for you, maybe you wouldn't feel so distant." Distant? I was close to my dad. He gave me a good life while Sarah didn't give a crap. I finally had enough of his jabs and told him straight up, "Don't talk about my dad. He's better than Sarah will ever be, and he's done more for me than you can even imagine." He never tried that stepdad crap with me again. The only consistent thing about Sarah and Phil was their absence. They had their own family. They had 3 kids together, and I didn't even know their names until much later. I wasn't invited to family gatherings, birthdays, or any of that stuff. It's like they just erased me from their lives as soon as they had their new family. Losing my dad when I was 14 was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. I mean, it felt like my entire world fell apart overnight. One minute, we're making dinner plans and talking about me starting high school, and the next, he's just gone. A heart attack, just like that. No warning, no nothing. I didn't even get to say goodbye. I remember the day so clearly. The phone call, the panic, the moment when everything froze. My uncles, Pete and Rob, came over right away, but it was like I couldn't hear anything anyone was saying. Everything just became noise. I felt numb, like someone had just ripped my life in half, and I was left with the jagged edges. After the funeral, things moved fast. Faster than I was ready for, to be honest. The house where I grew up, the one my dad worked so hard to keep for us, had to be sold. I didn't have much say in it. It wasn't like I had anywhere else to go. My uncles offered to take me in right away, which I'll always be grateful for. They didn't hesitate. Pete and Rob had always been more like older brothers to me than just uncles, so I knew I'd be safe with them. Still, it felt like I was leaving behind everything I had left of my dad. Now here's the part where my mom and Phil show up again. Surprise, surprise, right? It had been years since I'd seen either of them, and all of a sudden, after my dad's death, they're acting like they care, like they're gonna swoop in and be the heroes. Sarah didn't even come to the funeral, not because she was too devastated to show up. Nope, she didn't have time. Can you believe that? No time to bury the man who took care of her kid when she couldn't be bothered. But Phil? Oh, he showed up. Of course he did. The funeral was over, and I was sitting with my uncles trying to process everything when Phil walked over to me. I remember looking up at him thinking, what the hell do you want? He had that stupid fake concerned look on his face, the kind where you know someone's just doing it for show. He sat down next to me and said, "You know, Jamie, you can always come live with Sarah and me. We've got room for you." I just stared at him. not knowing whether to laugh or scream. This guy, who I'd seen maybe 5 times in my whole life, who wasn't even man enough to show up at the funeral with my mom, was offering me a place to live? No thanks, man. I wasn't about to leave my uncles, the only real family I had left, to go live with people who barely knew I existed. I told him no, that I was staying with Pete and Rob, and that was that. Or so I thought. Phil wasn't one to give up so easily, though. He went on this whole rant about how family is important and how your mom and I really want to be there for you now. Now? Where were they when I was a kid, huh? Where were they when I was sitting by the window waiting for Sarah to show up for her court-ordered weekends? Now they want to be parents? Too little, too late. I shut him down pretty hard after that. Told him I didn't need their pity or their help, that my dad had raised me just fine without them, and I wasn't about to let them waltz into my life now, just because it was convenient for them. Phil didn't like that. His face got all red, and he started sputtering about how I was just a kid and didn't understand how hard things had been for Sarah. Oh, please. I wasn't about to sit there and let him talk down to me like that. So I said, hard for her? My dad's the one who had to pick up the pieces after she ditched me. Don't even try to act like she's the victim here. He stormed off after that, but not before throwing in some passive-aggressive comment about how I'd regret cutting them out of my life. Yeah, sure, like I was going to lose sleep over not having Sarah and Phil around. Please. After that, I packed up my stuff and moved in with Pete and Rob. They were amazing, honestly. I was grieving, but they gave me space to process everything in my own time. They didn't push me to move on or get over it. They let me be angry, sad, confused. Whatever I needed to feel, they let me feel it. And that's something I'll always be thankful for. The move itself was weird. Leaving my childhood home, the place where I had all these memories of my dad, was hard. Every room reminded me of him, whether it was the kitchen where we'd cook together or the living room where we'd watch movies every Friday night. It wasn't just a house to me. It was the only place I'd ever felt truly safe, but it was gone now, just like my dad, and there was nothing I could do about it. The first night at Pete and Rob's place, I barely slept. I kept expecting my dad to walk in and tell me everything was going to be okay, but he wasn't there, and it wasn't okay, not by a long shot. I tried to keep myself busy after that, throwing myself into school and anything else that would keep me from thinking too much. But no matter what I did, it always came back to that emptiness. The fact that my dad wasn't there, and he never would be again. And you'd think that after everything, Sarah and Phil would just leave me alone, right? Wrong. Phil called a few more times after I moved in with my uncles, trying to reconnect or whatever. He'd say things like, Jamie, I know you're hurting, but your mom and I want to help you through this. Yeah, because they've been so helpful up until now, right? One time, he even had the audacity to say, your mom has changed. She's ready to be there for you now. Ready now? Now that my dad was gone? Now that they didn't have to worry about dealing with him? I told him flat out, I don't need her now. I needed her when I was a kid and she wasn't there. It's too late. After that, I stopped answering his calls. I didn't want anything to do with either of them. They had their life, their perfect little family with their 3 kids, and I had mine with my uncles. I didn't need Sarah or Phil pretending to care when it was clear they didn't. And honestly, life with Pete and Rob was good. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could replace my dad. But it was stable. They supported me in ways that Sarah and Phil never could. They showed up for me. They were there, and that's all I ever really needed. By the time I was 27, I thought I had everything figured out when it came to my so-called family. I'd gotten pretty good at keeping my distance from Sarah and Phil, only dealing with them when it was absolutely necessary. The rest of Sarah's side of the family? I didn't have any real issues with them. I wasn't super close to them or anything, but they didn't try to force the whole family thing on me like Sarah and Phil did, so I figured it was fine to stay in touch. They were still part of my life, just on the outskirts, you know? So when my grandparents on Sarah's side invited me to this family birthday party, I didn't think twice about going. I wasn't expecting anything dramatic, just a regular family thing. Show up, say hi, eat some cake, make small talk, then dip out. Pretty standard. Matt, my fiancé, couldn't make it because he had work, so I figured I'd just go alone, say my hellos, and get out. But of course, nothing's ever that simple with Sarah and Phil involved. When I got to the party, everything seemed normal at first. My grandparents were happy to see me, and I chatted with a few cousins and aunts. It was chill, nothing weird. I spotted Sarah and Phil across the room, but I didn't go up to them. Didn't see the point. They knew where I stood, and I wasn't about to make things awkward by pretending we were close. So I stuck to the people I was comfortable with, keeping my distance. But apparently, Phil had other plans. I was standing by the food table, grabbing a slice of cake, when I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I turned around, and there he was. Phil. Right there with that same fake, overly friendly smile he always had. I internally sighed because I knew this was going to be annoying. "Jamie, good to see you," he said like we were old pals. I forced a small smile, mostly out of politeness, and said, "Hey, Phil." I didn't want to be rude in front of everyone, but I was already mentally preparing myself for whatever crap he was about to start. He wasted no time getting to the point. "So I heard you're engaged. That's exciting news," he said, still with that fake smile. I nodded, trying to keep it short. "Yeah, thanks." I was hoping he'd just leave it at that, but of course, that's not how Phil operates. "You know, Sarah and I were kind of surprised we didn't get an invite to the engagement party," he said, lowering his voice like he was trying to be all serious. "I mean, we're your family. I figured we'd be included." I could feel my jaw clench, but I kept it together. I wasn't about to make a scene at a birthday party. "It wasn't a big party, just close family and friends," I said, trying to keep things as neutral as possible. But I could already see where this was going, and it wasn't going to be good. Phil didn't back down. He never does. "Well, we are family, Jamie. Sarah and I have always considered you part of our family, and we were hurt not to be invited. We care about you, you know." That's when I felt my blood start to boil. Care about me? They had the nerve to say they cared? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Phil, I think we both know why you weren't invited. Let's not pretend like we're close." I could see the smile fading from his face. He wasn't expecting me to call him out, but I wasn't going to let him get away with playing the concerned parent card. He looked around like he was making sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "Look, Jamie, I've always tried to be there for you, and I think it's time we move past whatever issues we've had. I know your mom wasn't perfect, but I've always considered you my daughter. I'd like to walk you down the aisle if you'll let me." I swear. Time stopped for a second when he said that. Walk me down the aisle? This guy? The man who wasn't even around when I needed someone? The audacity. I felt my hands start to shake, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "Are you kidding me right now?" I said, my voice louder than I intended. A few people nearby turned to look, but I didn't care. "You've always considered me your daughter? Phil, I barely know you. You think just because you married my mom, you're suddenly my dad. My dad is dead. He's the one who should be walking me down the aisle. But he can't because he's gone. And you have no right to act like you're some kind of replacement." Phil's face turned red. He wasn't expecting me to lash out like that, but I was done holding back. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said, trying to sound calm, but I could tell he was pissed. "I've done my best to be a father figure to you, but you've never given me a chance. Your dad didn't do everything right, you know. He kept you away from us, and I think that's why you're so angry." Oh, that was it. That was the last straw. "Don't you dare talk about my dad," I snapped, stepping closer to him. "He did everything for me, while Sarah was too busy running away from her responsibilities. You have no idea what it was like for him, raising me alone while she bailed. And now you want to come in and act like you're better than him, like you deserve to take his place? Get over yourself, Phil." The whole room had gone quiet by now. Everyone was staring, but I didn't care. I was done pretending. Phil just stood there, looking stunned, like he didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, and finally he muttered, "You're being disrespectful. You need to be more grateful for the people who care about you." That's when I lost it. Grateful? Grateful for what? You weren't there, Phil. Sarah wasn't there. None of you were there when I needed someone. My dad was the only one who cared, and now you want me to be grateful to you? You're nothing to me. Nothing. With that, I turned and walked out. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't care. I could hear whispers and feel the stares of everyone in the room, but it didn't matter. I was done with the whole thing. Done with Phil, done with Sarah, done with pretending like they were anything more than strangers. Later that night, I got a text from one of my aunts saying I shouldn't have made a scene, that I embarrassed Phil and Sarah in front of everyone. But honestly, I don't regret it. They wanted to play family, but they don't get to pick and choose when they're there for me. They had years to step up and they didn't. So no, I'm not sorry, and I sure as hell don't need them at my wedding. Update 1. After the whole showdown at the party, I thought that would be it. Like, I figured I made my point loud and clear, and they'd back off. But nah, of course not. The texts started rolling in that night, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. First, it was my Aunt Carol. She's one of those peacekeepers, you know? Always trying to smooth things over, make everyone happy. She sent me this long message about how I shouldn't have publicly humiliated Phil and Sarah at the party. "You know they're trying, Jamie," she wrote. "Phil's always seen you as his daughter. You didn't have to embarrass him like that in front of everyone. I stared at the text for a solid minute, just shaking my head. Trying? Really? They've had my whole life to try. I wasn't about to feel bad for standing up for myself after everything. So I shot back a reply. If they actually cared, they wouldn't have waited until now to act like it. I'm not playing nice just to make them feel better about the crap they put me through. I didn't get a response from her after that. But then the real kicker came the next morning when I got a call from Sarah. I hadn't spoken to her directly in, honestly, I couldn't even remember the last time. Maybe a year? Probably more. I almost didn't pick up, but I was curious what she had to say after everything. Jamie, we need to talk, she started, her voice all stiff and formal like she was about to give me a lecture. I sighed, already regretting answering the phone. What do you want, Sarah? I heard what happened at the party, she said, like she wasn't even there. And I have to say, I'm really disappointed in you. You didn't have to lash out at Phil like that. He's only ever tried to help. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Help? Are you serious right now? The only time Phil's ever tried to help is when it's convenient for him. He thinks just because he married you, he can waltz into my life and pretend to be my dad. He's not, and he never will be. She went quiet for a second, and I could tell she didn't like being called out. But then she did what she always does, shifted the blame. You know, this attitude of yours isn't going to get you anywhere. You can't keep holding on to the past forever, Jamie. Your father isn't here anymore. Phil and I are. I felt a surge of anger so strong I had to bite my tongue for a second before I said something I couldn't take back. But I was done playing nice. Yeah, you're here now, Sarah. Where were you when I was a kid? When I actually needed you? Don't act like showing up now makes up for everything you did, or didn't do. She sighed, that kind of annoyed sigh she used to do when I was a kid, like I was being difficult for no reason. I know I made mistakes, Jamie, but it wasn't easy for me either. I did the best I could. The best you could? I cut her off. The best you could do was leave me with Dad and barely show up for your weekends? You didn't even try. You weren't there, Sarah, so don't stand there and tell me you did your best. There was another long pause, and I could hear her struggling to find something to say. Finally, she went with, I'm your mother, Jamie. You don't get to talk to me like this. I couldn't help it. I laughed again, but this time it wasn't because it was funny. It was just ridiculous. You're my mother? Really? You think that title means something just because you gave birth to me? You lost the right to that a long time ago. You weren't a mother then, and you're not one now. That must have hit a nerve because her voice got all sharp and defensive. You need to stop living in the past. You're going to regret cutting us out of your life, Jamie. Phil's only ever wanted to help you, and you're throwing it back in his face. At that point, I was done. Done with the guilt trips, done with her excuses, done with her trying to make me the bad guy. No, Sarah, the only thing I regret is wasting my time thinking you'd ever care. Don't call me again. And with that, I hung up. I sat there for a few minutes, just staring at my phone, trying to process everything. Part of me was pissed. Pissed that she still didn't get it, pissed that she was trying to make me feel like the villain in this whole thing. But another part of me, I felt free. Like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my forgiveness, nothing. But of course, it didn't stop there. Later that day, my cousin Brianna called. She's closer to my age, and we'd always gotten along fine, so I figured maybe this call would be different. But nope. Jamie, I heard what happened. Are you okay? She started. It seemed genuine enough, so I let my guard down a little. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, they don't get it. They never will. Brianna sighed, and I could already tell where this was going. I get that you're upset, but don't you think you were a little harsh? Phil's been trying, and Sarah, well, she's still your mom, you know? I groaned. Not you too, Brianna. I don't want to hear it. They didn't try. They didn't show up for me when it mattered, and now they think they can just waltz back in and play family. It doesn't work like that. I know, she said, trying to sound understanding. But they're still family. Maybe you could just, I don't know, meet them halfway? I could feel my patience wearing thin. Meet them halfway? How about they meet me halfway for once in their lives? I'm done bending over backward to make them feel better about what they did. Brianna went quiet, and after a few awkward seconds, she just said, Okay, I get it. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I didn't want to be mad at her. It wasn't her fault. But I was tired of everyone making excuses for Sarah and Phil. Tired of people acting like I was the one who needed to fix things when they were the ones who broke it. That night, I sat down with Matt and told him everything that had happened. He listened, like he always does, and just said, You don't owe them anything, Jamie. You've done more than enough. It's okay to let go. And that's when I realized he was right. I didn't need to keep carrying this weight anymore. I didn't need their validation, their approval, or their version of family. I had my own life now, my own future to build with people who actually cared about me. So I blocked Sarah and Phil's numbers. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. Update 2. I thought that after blocking Sarah and Phil, things would calm down, that I'd get some peace and they'd finally get the hint. But of course they didn't. I should have known better. Instead, they took things up a notch. I wasn't answering their calls or texts, so Phil decided the next best thing was to show up at my apartment. Yeah, you read that right. The guy literally showed up at my front door, unannounced, like we were close or something. It was a Saturday afternoon and I was just hanging out, trying to enjoy a quiet weekend. Matt was out running errands, and I was catching up on some stuff at home. I heard a knock at the door and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was probably just a package or a neighbor. But when I opened the door, there was Phil, standing there like he belonged. I stared at him, speechless for a second. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked, not even trying to hide the irritation in my voice. "We need to talk," he said, all serious, like this was some kind of intervention or something. "You've been ignoring us, and that's not fair. We deserve a chance to explain ourselves." I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "I've heard all your excuses, Phil. There's nothing left to explain." He looked frustrated, like he couldn't believe I wasn't just letting him in. "Jamie, this has gone on long enough. Your mom and I want to fix this. We're your family, and you're shutting us out." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was just so typical of him. "Family? You don't get to show up now and act like you've been family all these years. Where were you when I was growing up? Where was Sarah? You can't just ignore someone for half their life and then show up when it's convenient." Phil stepped forward, trying to inch his way into the apartment. But I wasn't budging. "We didn't ignore you. Your dad—" "Don't!" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare bring my dad into this. He was there for me every single day while Sarah bailed on me. You've got no right to speak about him." I could see his face getting red, and I knew I hit a nerve. But I didn't care. I was done holding back. "I'm just saying," he started, clearly trying to keep his cool. "Your dad didn't make things easy for us. He never let us get close to you." I felt my blood boil at that. "Are you kidding me? My dad didn't make things hard. Sarah didn't even try. And you? You're just as bad. You showed up a handful of times and acted like you were doing me a favor. Don't stand here and pretend like you've been some kind of father figure to me. You weren't there." Phil's face hardened, and I could see he was getting angry now. "You need to stop living in the past, Jamie. You're an adult now. You can't keep blaming your mom and me for what happened years ago." "Oh, trust me, I'm not living in the past," I shot back. "But I'm not about to pretend like you and Sarah have changed just because you're suddenly interested in playing happy families. You can't rewrite history to make yourselves feel better." Phil let out a frustrated sigh and ran his hand through his hair. "We've been trying, Jamie. We've been trying to make things right. But you keep pushing us away. You're going to regret cutting us out like this." And there it was. The guilt trip. The same one Sarah tried to pull. It was like they'd rehearsed this or something. But I wasn't falling for it. "Regret?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "What exactly am I supposed to regret? Cutting out the people who weren't there when I needed them? Letting go of people who only show up when it suits them? No, Phil. The only thing I regret is letting you and Sarah back into my life at all." He just stood there, staring at me like I was some ungrateful kid who didn't appreciate what he was offering. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and cold. "You're going to realize one day that you need us." I shook my head, completely done with this conversation. "No, Phil, I don't need you. I never did." And with that, I stepped back and slammed the door in his face. For a second, I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe it had come to this, but at the same time, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally free of all the guilt, all the pressure, all the fake family nonsense that Sarah and Phil had been trying to push on me. Of course, it didn't end there. I heard him knock again, this time louder. "Jamie, open the door!" he called through the door, his voice angrier now. "We're not done!" But we were done. As far as I was concerned, we were more than done. I didn't even bother responding. I just walked away from the door and sat down on the couch, turning up the TV to drown out the sound of his knocking. After a few minutes, he finally gave up and left. Later that night, I got a message from Sarah. It was short and passive-aggressive, just like I expected. "I heard what you did. You'll regret this." I didn't even bother replying. I deleted the message and blocked her number again, this time for good. When Matt came home and I told him what happened, he just shook his head. I can't believe they still don't get it, he said. You've been more than fair with them. Yeah, well, they're never going to get it, I said. And I'm done trying to make them understand. And that was it. That was the moment I realized I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my forgiveness, not even a conversation. They had years to be there for me, and they chose not to. So now I was choosing to live my life without them. And for the first time, I felt okay with that.